Hi everybody, it's Ms. Dupree. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about matter and its properties. So let's start with the big question. What exactly is matter? Well, matter is stuff. The stuff that's all around us and the stuff that is us. Scientifically speaking, matter is anything that has mass and volume. Mass is a measure of how much stuff or how much matter is inside something. We already learned that the atom is the very smallest unit of matter. So if you could take one single atom and put it on a super tiny scale, it would have a super tiny little amount of mass. So the more of something that you have, the more atoms that you have, so the more mass you will have. Mass is simply a measure of heaviness, how heavy something is. So if you have a smaller chunk of gold, maybe this chunk of gold has 2 trillion atoms, and that gives it a mass of 20 grams. A larger chunk of gold, maybe it's got 4 trillion atoms, so it's got more mass, 40 grams. Okay? This larger piece of gold is going to be heavier. It's going to have more mass because it has more stuff or more gold atoms inside of it, making it heavier. Now, volume is the amount of space that something takes up, or simply how big or small it is. If you have 2 grains of sand, these are microscopic pictures of grains of sand here, they cannot both be in the exact same place at the exact same time. One grain of sand, this grain of sand here, is taking up this tiny little bit of space. So the other grain of sand can't be where the first grain is, so it has to go somewhere else, right next to it. So the bigger that something is, the more volume it has. So that smaller chunk of gold not only has less mass, it's got less volume. And because it's smaller, and the bigger chunk of gold has more mass and it's got more volume. Now, that's not always the way that it works. Take a look at this balloon and this rock. The rock has more mass because it's heavier. It's got more stuff crammed inside of it. The balloon has less mass, but it has more volume because it's bigger than the rocks, which means that it's taking up more space. Make sense? It's that simple. Matter is anything that has mass and volume. So air is matter, water is matter, rocks are matter. All of our solids, liquids, and gases are matter. So what kind of things are not matter? Well, gravity is not matter. It doesn't have mass or volume. Energy is not matter. It doesn't have mass or volume. So that means sound, light, electricity, heat. All of these things are not matter. Matter can be described by its properties. A property is a characteristic or quality of something. It's just a way to describe an object. Physical properties can be observed or measured without changing the identity of the substance. So for example, physical properties could be just looking at the color or measuring the mass and volume. You're not actually doing anything that changes the identity of that substance. Chemical properties describe how a substance reacts with other substances, which does usually result in making even new substances with new identities. So just as an example, we know that iron will react with oxygen and it will make rust. And so in order to see that reaction, you have to, you're going to end up with the iron changing into rust. You're actually going to be changing that iron. So that's going to be a chemical property. Now, when we're talking about properties of matter, we're going to look at two types: non-characteristic properties, which we're going to call NCPs, and characteristic properties that we're going to call CPs. Okay, let's start with non-characteristic properties, or NCPs. Non-characteristic properties can describe matter, but they cannot identify a specific type of matter. So you can't tell what it is that you have when you're using a non-characteristic property. So for example, let's say that you have an object that has a mass of 100 grams. Well, that tells you something about that object. It tells you that it has a mass of 100 grams, so that's a property. But does that tell you what the object is or what the object is made of? No. Lots of things can have a mass of 100 grams. Including a rock, a balloon, a container of water. So that 100 grams does tell you something about that matter, but it does not tell you what it is. Here are some non-characteristic properties of matter. We've got mass, volume, temperature. Look at color and odor. It says usually you cannot use color and odor to identify an object. Occasionally you can, and we're going to look at that in a minute. We also have temperature, shape, state of matter, whether something is a solid, liquid, or gas. These are all things that help you describe matter, looking at the properties, but they do not identify a specific type of matter. They can't tell you what element or what compound that you might have. Okay, characteristic properties, or CP, it's a property that is unique to a specific substance. So a characteristic property can be used to identify one specific substance. So for example, pure water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Rubbing alcohol boils at 82.6 degrees Celsius. So if you have two clear liquids that look the same, and obviously you don't want to drink it because you'd be drinking alcohol, you can identify which one is the water and which one is the alcohol by boiling them and seeing what temperature they boil at. So that's a characteristic property. You can identify exactly what you have in that container. Here's another example. Silver is a metal, and it has a density of 2.5. And it's okay if you don't know what density means. You're going to be learning about density in another lesson. But just know that silver has a density of 2.5. Platinum has a density of 21.45. So these are actual measurements that can be taken. Once you know what density is, you're going to learn how to measure it. But what you should know for now is that if you have a sample of silver and you have a sample of platinum and they look the same, they're both shiny silver metals, but you can identify which one is the silver and which one is the platinum just by measuring their densities. So that's a characteristic property. Here are some of the characteristic properties of matter. So these are the things that can be used to identify exactly what substance you have. So you're going to be learning about density. Magnetism is a characteristic property. Solubility, which means how much of a substance can dissolve in a certain amount of water. We've got the temperature that a substance will freeze or melt or boil or condense. You've got the conductivity of an object. That's basically measuring how easily that material can pass energy, like electricity or heat. And then here we see sometimes color and odor can be a characteristic property. For example, the element sulfur, it has this very distinctive kind of butter yellow color. It's always that color. And it also has a very recognizable odor. It kind of smells like rotten eggs, and it's very, very, very distinct. If you smell it, you will know that you're smelling sulfur. So if you have this butter yellow material with this really rotten egg odor, that is going to be an example of color and odor being a characteristic property because you're going to know that you have sulfur. Okay, that's it for this lesson. You should have your graphic organizer filled out, and you should understand the information on this review slide. If you have any questions, please ask. Otherwise, you're all set. Good job, everybody. See you next time.